Half
Mm.
of me wants to put him with Anthony Eden, but I just can't do that. I can't do that. I don't remember the exact quote, but you basically said, I think we should look back at the Jim Callahan years more fondly. So, explain yourself. A lot higher than I thought you were going to give it, I'll be
You
honest.
see, to be fair, I think deserves to go down as one of the great post-war prime ministers.
Okay. So, would you say landslide or strong majority?
I mean, I think you'd have to say landslide.
This is tough. This is tough.
Yeah, that's difficult, isn't it?
I'm going to feel like a dick now. And people's going to think, oh, Andy, you're being such a dickhead. Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Andy and I am the Yellow Rebel. And today I thought with one of my panel regulars, as well as a personal friend of mine, Mathew Hulbert, that in celebration of this channel getting 50 subscribers, now 61 from my last count, that together we would do a tier list ranking of post-war prime ministers. Now, these are prime ministers after the Second World War, so from 1945 to 2024, which is when Rishi Sunak's premiership had concluded. Now, I would love to do a full tier list of all the British prime ministers, but I think that would take us a bit over the 1 hour 30 benchmark that I usually try and set for my videos. But perhaps we could do an interwar tier list, so looking at the interwar prime ministers, so people like David Lloyd George and Anne Asquith and the rest. So maybe one day. But first, before we dive in, I thought we will discuss some recent news about Mathew Hulbert's writing career, which has grown new legs as we discuss his chapter for Iain Dale's new book. Now, I will put a timestamp on this video in case you do just want to go straight to the tier list, but I would recommend sticking around for Mathew's latest ventures when it comes to his writing. So, Mathew, thank you once again for doing this. And perhaps if you could start by showing us the book to the camera and explain what this book is about and how you ended up writing for Iain Dale.
Well, first of all, Andy, it's great to see you, mate, and always such a joy to come on your YouTube channel. Absolutely love it, and congratulations on all your success with these wonderful subscribers. I love it. So this is the book, edited by Iain Dale, who is a prolific author.
The chapter.
You've got your copy there, fantastic. Yeah, so it's British by-elections, 1969 to 2025, the 88 by-election campaigns that shaped our politics, and there's 88 different writers. Iain is one of them. He's written a chapter himself, but there's 87 others. And I'm extraordinarily privileged and honoured, Andy, to be one of those. I mean, when you think that there's people like Andrew Marr, former BBC political editor, gosh, who else is there?
John Curtis?
Sir John Curtis, famous psophologist.
Hey, John, I apologise.
Eleanor Goodman, formerly of Channel 4 News, and Tim Shipman, formerly of the Sunday Times, now of the Spectator, wonderful political writer, his colleague James Heal. I mean, so many kind of political luminaries, and then there's also the likes of me as well. So, and of course, both of our good friend Michael Mullaney, my local Lib Dem councillor here in Heatley,
Indeed,
who's written a chapter. Also, my wonderful friend, I don't know if he's currently a Tory or not. I never quite know with he's quite critical of them. But my wonderful darling friend Will Timmins has also written for the book too. So and David Laws, former coalition minister, so many different people. So yeah, I mean, I'm just very, very honoured, Andy. My first time as a published author, so exciting.
Because you've written for you've done research for Iain Dale, but this is the first piece of writing in a published book, whatever, not let alone Iain Dale. So obviously it shows that when Iain was thinking of authors and writers, he obviously held you in quite high regard, it would seem.
Yeah, he did. I mean, it's really funny, actually, because me and Iain get on very well, but we sometimes disagree really quite strongly, you know. Never to the point, thank goodness, where it's broken the friendship, but we really do have, a little bit like me and Dr. Chris, we co-host Political Frenemies, and I mean, me and Chris disagree on almost everything, but we also recognise that you can actually be friends, because I hate this thing. I don't know about you, Andy, but I hate this thing, unless people are really kind of on the extremes, in which case I don't think I could be friends with them. But if people just felt different political views to you, well, that's democracy. That's like politics. That's why we have a democracy. And so, yeah, me and Ian really agree on some things and really, really disagree on others. So I don't want to say I was surprised when he asked me, but I wasn't expecting it. And so, yeah, I mean, what a joy. But I mean, I tell you, it was quite a rigorous process. I mean, I sent in my first draft and got it back with kind of copious notes about, what I need to add and what needs to be, I mean, it's quite an editing, what needs to be taken away and all the rest of it. So I think I rewrote it, well, at least once, if not more than that. But I mean, now to open up the book and see page 617, Batley and Spen, 2016, and then Mathew Hulbert. I mean, I just still can't quite believe it.
But many congratulations to you, Mathew. I think it's very well deserved. As someone that follows your writing and has seen your previous work, I think it's very well deserved.
Thank you.
So, from your own writing of your chapter and the writing of other authors, I just want to speak more generally about the book. What's the book trying to achieve or tell us about British by-elections and how significant they are? Why should we care about them? Or is this book more for political geeks like me? Is there a deeper meaning to it? Or
I mean, look, it absolutely is for political geeks. And I'd say, if you're the political obsessive in your family, get it yourself. If you have other political obsessives in your family,
Christmas.
What a fantastic Christmas gift for the political lover in your family or in your friendship group or whatever.
Well, this was going to be my Christmas present to you, Mathew, but it seems like you already got a free copy.
Yeah, I got sent. All the authors got sent a copy, which is really nice from Bite That Publishing and from Ian. But yeah, I mean, I think what I'd say is that, look, by-elections are, whenever there's a by-election, it's exciting, isn't it? I mean, especially when they're not sure on who is going to win it, which is kind of in the period that we're in now. A bit less exciting when the winner is pretty much kind of assured. But nonetheless, I mean, you and me and Michael and lots of others would have stayed up so many nights waiting for a by-election result, especially if the Lib Dems were in contention, And so, I mean, I think to just be able to pore over this and to reflect back on by-elections that you remember, and then to go even further back, I mean, into like the 18th century and to read about the by-elections of the time is just absolutely fascinating. And there's a number of different kind of writing styles in here as well with different writers, which is really interesting to read. I mean, to be honest, I don't want to preempt your question, Andy, but in terms of the one that I wrote, it was really quite difficult to write about because obviously it was the election after the murder of Joe Cox, the horrific, appalling murder of Joe Cox.
Yeah, and also a tragic reason to have a by-election, and also quite unusual because no major political party stood except the Labour candidate Tracy Barbin. So could you perhaps explain more about your piece?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, as you say, it happened after for the most appalling of reasons, the murder of Joe Cox, when at a constituency surgery, trying to help her constituents. I mean, I have no words for that. It was just dreadful. Anyway, this is the subsequent by-election in Batley and Spen in Yorkshire. And as you say, it was won by the Labour candidate Tracy Brabin, who is a former, now the mayor of West Yorkshire. And of course, I first knew of her when she was an actress, famously in Coronation Street.
Wow.
Yes.
Claim to fame. Getting around again.
Well, it's something that I can read you a little bit, actually, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Where I wrote, so I write here in my chapter, there was a showbiz connection with Labour's candidate too. Before entering politics, Tracy Brabin was an actress and a host of popular TV soaps, including EastEnders, Emmerdale, Casualty, and Doctors. She was arguably best known for playing the role of Tricia Armstrong in Coronation Street, a hard-up single mum who had regular interactions with busybody with a heart of gold Vera Duckworth, played by national treasure and fellow Labour supporter Liz Dawn. And actually, I once got to meet Liz Dawn when she came here to Hinckley, to the old Hinckley Leisure Centre, and made an appearance at an event. And me and my mum, bless her, God rest her soul, God rest both their souls because they're both known.
Yeah.
But me and mum waited round all day to see Liz Dawn, and we finally got to meet her, and she was an absolute darling. And I mean, I've not still got it now, sadly, but she signed something for me and all the. This is the days of pre-smartphone and all of that. So she was wonderful. Tracy Brabin, rather, who won this by-election, before getting into politics, was probably best known for her time in Coronation Street. But yeah, so Labour are always going to win this by-election. As you say, the Dems, the Tories, the Greens, and even UKIP all decided not to enter this contest, and I think quite right too. And so it was basically Tracy Brabin up against a number of, well, I think you have to be careful calling people far right, but certainly hard right candidate.
Okay.
So she faced competition from the BNP, an outfit at the time known as Liberty GB, also the National Front. I also, Andy, managed to get a mention of, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I actually managed to get a mention of Heatley, my hometown, in my chapter.
I did. Yeah. I did see that.
And I might just quickly read you that bit. So, I write,
go ahead.
Thank you. The English Democrats stood Therese Hurst as their candidate. Hurst, when Therese Muchovich previously led Veritas, the political vehicle launched by the Permatan former TV host and East Midlands MEP Robert Kilroy-Silk when he left UKIP, launched in January 2005 at a golf club in Hinckley, Leicestershire. So there you go.
So you sneaked a bit of Hinckley into your chapter. What I enjoy about your chapter is that you do it with such sensitivity, because I think being given that one, because Iain Dale, if I remember from our personal conversation, he gave you that chapter to do.
Absolutely.
And again, in unusual circumstances, main parties decided not to contest, like you said, Conservative, Lib Dems, Greens, UKIP, who were quite, maybe not as prominent at the time, but still showing that kind of respectability. And I just absolutely loved doing a hard topic such as that by-election. You did it with such sensitivity and such class, Mathew, and also very well researched. Yeah. I like littering it with Hinckley references. Who does that?
Well, I just so happen to, and I've got to bring Michael Mullany back up here, who's written a different chapter, but he was the one who famously told me that he said, "You'll never guess who's been at Hinckley Golf Club this past weekend, whatever it was, back in 2016." I said, "Who?" He said, "Robert Kilroy-Silk is launched his Veritas here." I said, "No." I said, "What, in Hinckley?" He said, "Yeah, absolutely in Hinckley." So I had that little bit of knowledge from Michael, bless it. And when I was doing the research and saw that this Therese Hurst had previously been, I think it must have been pre-marriage, had been I can never quite know how to say her previous name, but Therese Munchovich or something like that. And then I saw that she'd taken over from Robert Kilroy-Silk leading. I mean, it never really did anything. It was just a vanity project of his. But she took over as leader, and so I thought, there's a legitimate reason here that I can actually mention Hinckley. And another fact that other people if they'd been that little fact.
There you go, putting Hinckley on the map. Yeah. It's quite interesting because in this this isn't the first in the chapters. This isn't the first by-election where it was a result of the incumbent being murdered. One being in the 90s by I believe it was a Conservative minister who. Absolutely. I think I want to say the IRA. I want to say it was some kind of car bombing, but maybe I'm misremembering it. Unusual because in that election, that was one where it actually did get contested by the main parties. And do you think the by-election you wrote kind of shows the polarization and sensitivity when it comes to politics now that even opposing candidates feel, whether they're doing it earnestly or not, have to show that level of respect for that area of a deceived candidate? What's your assessment on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And also you have to remember, Andy, that this was right around the time of not all that long after the EU referendum.
Yeah.
And we all know how polarizing that made our politics. I mean, not only were political parties divided on that, but families were divided on that, couples were divided on that, friends
Me and my
were divided
sister were.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was one of the most, because people feel so strongly, whether they were for Remain like me and you or for Leave, people felt it so strongly and so personally It did. I mean, it caused real problems in kind of real world relationships, not just in politics. And so that was another factor that I had to get into this as well. Also, Jeremy Corbyn had not all that long been Labour leader, I think around a year at this point. So Theresa May was prime minister. So there was lots to try and fit in to this chapter. So, I can't pretend it was easy to write. I think the reason why you might have expected Iain Dale to give me one where the Lib Dems or the Liberals did well, but I think he deliberately didn't want to do that because he didn't want it to just be kind of me saying, "Oh, aren't the Liberals great?"
Yeah.
Yeah. So he gave me a chapter where we obviously weren't even part of the by-election. So yeah. I mean, I can't pretend it was an easy one to write, but in a sense that I mean, and I'm sure none of them were easy to write, but I think mine was particularly difficult. But in a sense, that makes me feel even more gratified, Andy, because it meant that it was a real task for me. And so to now see my words printed, and as you say, actually, it's not my very first time being mentioned in a book because I helped research Iain's book, A Day in Politics.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mentioned it. He very kindly meant there it is. Love that. Also available now. And so I get a lovely mention in that as being part of the research for it. But this is the first one where my words under my name kind of appear. So no, this might be the first and last time. I hope it's not, but this might be the first and last time this happens. I'm kind of making the most of it,
I hope not, Matthew. Because again, I enjoy your writing pieces when you do columns or when you do blogs, and I absolutely enjoyed this chapter as well. Like I said, it was sensitively written, well researched, quite challenging as well, and I would recommend to anyone to go and purchase this book. Just before we close on this, do you think this was a watershed moment? Because we've mentioned how in other elections, it's not the first a MP got assassinated or killed or murdered. Do you think this is a watershed moment for British politics? If I hope not, but if it was to repeat again, do you think it will be by convention for mainstream parties to just step aside?
Well, sadly, I mean, it wasn't the last time this happened because, of course, we saw the murder of Sir David Amess, the Conservative MP. So it's and obviously we've seen, we're recording this just a few weeks after the horrific murder of Charlie Kirk in the United States. As much as he's someone whose politics are totally different to mine and yours, and I would have disagreed with him on almost everything. The fact is that there's never any excuse for political violence. I don't care how much you disagree with someone. I don't care how much you disagree with them. I don't care how much you think that their worldview is wrong or abhorrent or whatever you think it is. There's what you should try and do, and I know that you agree with this, Andy, obviously, is to beat these people in debate, to take them on in debate, to have a battle of ideas,
Yeah.
That can be done very, very robustly. I've no problem with that at all. But to get to a point where, and I don't know the motivations of the people who undertake this kind of thing, but to get to a point where you disagree with someone that much that you think violence towards them is the answer is just appalling. I pray, Andy, that we never see anything like this again. But part of me thinks that we probably will.
I share that as well, Matthew. I think there's a lot to answer for about our political culture as well. I think I'm going to sound like a granddad. I think social media doesn't help because I think it magnifies things.
Absolutely.
And we live in echo chambers. And I hope and pray we don't see that. But like you, I feel like it could happen again. Trying to end on a high, if you could remind people of the book, where they can purchase it. Can they purchase it online in bookstores? And
it's British by-elections edited by the wonderful Iain Dale, and featuring so many of the writers that I've mentioned. Another one that political obsessives will know is Sir Vernon Bogdanor, who is often a writer on political matters. So Lord Parkinson, so many great writers. Joe Pike, formerly of Newsnight and ITV News. So many people. So again, to see Mathew Hulbert there in the middle of it is still absolutely shocks me. But yeah, people can get it.
Proud of you, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you. People can get it on Amazon. They can get it via Politico, Waterstones. If you go in store, you may have to ask for it. You may have to order it. But please, please, please do that. And I say that if you've got a political obsessed in your family, what better than this chunky book?
And with Christmas coming up, I would recommend that to any political geeks. Thank you so much, Mathew. And
Cheers.
Speaking of by-elections, let's get into the thing I'm sure some of you have all been waiting for, which is me and Mathew giving a tier list ranking of post-war British Prime Ministers, starting with a Prime Minister who actually lost no by-elections during their premiership after sweeping into power in a landslide election in 1945, but in just 6 years would go on to see a complete reversal of fortunes in his defeat in 1951. So let's get into this. So here we are, Mathew. So, right, start with, do you know what a tier rank is? Do you know what tier ranking is?
I have a bit of an idea, but just, yeah.
Tier list. You've got an idea. So basically, it's like a grading system, Mathew. Now, I'm not too sure if you can see on your screen very well, but I will go through it to you. So basically, if you imagine like a grading system, so you did O levels, you did GCSEs, didn't you, or whatever you did, A levels. O levels is my dad. He keeps calling them O levels, and now it's been passed on to me. I keep calling them my O levels, and I'm like, GCSEs, Andy. So you've got A's, your B's, your C's. So what I've done here now, S is so. When people do tier lists, S means supreme. So S is the top tier. That means they're flawless. There's no, they're top end, brilliant, fantastic. But I've decided, then it goes A, B, C, whatever. But I've decided to be a little bit different with mine. So my top tier, I called landslide. So I've decided to do it like how parliaments get majorities, just to make it a little bit more fun. So top end is landslide. I don't need to explain that to you, Mathew. The second one is strong majority. So again, that's someone who was pretty good. Not great, but they were pretty damn good, did amazing things, a lot of achievements, but maybe there was a few things where, they didn't get quite right, but still, like an A. Imagine if it was like an A. Then we have slim majority. Now that's going to be the B in our category. So that means they were pretty good overall, not very exciting. They steadied the ship. They were okay. They were more than okay. They were just above okay. Nothing too exciting. Then for my fourth one, it is hung parliament. Now that one is I wasn't sure whether to make that an E or a C or a D. I've decided to put it as a C. So they're pretty average, so they're pretty average. Now, they might have done some amazing things, but would give them an A rating. So if you imagine like at school with all your different topics, they might have social issues, they've got an A. They're brilliant on that. But economics, they were terrible. So that might make them a little bit average. But then they could have just been a very average prime minister. They might have just been very middle of the road. Okay, nothing exciting. Yeah. My next one is called backbencher, and that's going to be my EF category. That means they were pretty bad, not very good, didn't do a lot of good things, maybe did one or two decent things. And then for my final category, the ones that are going in the bin, they are called lost their deposits, and they're going to be my F. They're the ones who've got no redeemable qualities. They were useless. They didn't achieve anything. Their objectives, they were just terrible, absolutely terrible. Can't give them any songs or praises. So, right. Does that make sense to you, Mathew?
I love that, mate. That sounds fantastic.
Awesome. Right. Let's get into this. So, right. I will be turning away from my screen, so don't worry. I'm not ignoring you, Mathew. I can never ignore you, Mathew. So,
Impossible.
First, it is impossible. You're too likable, Mathew. I love you too much, mate. I love you too much.
Cheers,
You can never have too much love. Right. So first on the board is Clement Attlee, who expanded the welfare state, created the National Health Service, mass nationalisation, took what I think is a rather interesting position on Labour's foreign policy, because it was vehemently anti-communist, anti-Soviet Union, which I find quite interesting for a socialist party. I don't think you'd get that today with the Labour left. Something that I think gets lost today with some progressive politics, but I won't put my own. Well, I will put my biases in because it's obviously a tier ranking, Andy. But he got us joining NATO. in fact, was a founding member of NATO, helped start Britain's nuclear programme. Depends where you sit on that, I suppose. So clearly positioning as a pro-Western ally. I think rather tragic figure because he wins the 94 election against Churchill, who, as we all know, Matthew, helped single-handedly win us the war. With his bare hands, I should say. Maybe a slight exaggeration there. But he'd managed to do this huge upset for Churchill, so he's voted in on change. People didn't want to see the return of the poverty or the squalor of the past after war times. And yet, as quickly as Attlee rose to power in 6 years, by 1951, he was booted out of office and was forgotten from public memory. I don't think he is without failings, in my opinion. He was quite a few big failings, like the economic panic of the dollar convertibility, the partition of India, which I think in modern lens, we could say he could have handled that better. That isn't, I'm not an imperialist, by the way, people. I just want to make that very clear. But I think the way he handled it could have been a lot better, which is why we see tensions in Pakistan and India today. Devaluation of the pound often plagues a lot of Labour governments, even budget deficits. Even John Maynard Keynes, of all people, told him he needed to tackle the deficit. Of all people, John Maynard Keynes said, "You're going too far with the deficit." And when he nationalised industry, he didn't give us this great Jerusalem of workers owning these industries. It was very top-heavy, command economy by bureaucrats. So, Matthew, your thoughts, and is any of what I've just said about that all worth in consideration? Your thoughts, and where would you put good old Attlee? Major Attlee, we should say.
Indeed. It's great in a way to start off with Clement Attlee as the first post-war prime minister, because I would say that he has to be pretty darn near the top of any list. And I think it's a great shame that whilst his achievements aren't forgotten, so people obviously, the NHS is still very much with us today, and thank God that it is. We can talk another time about the problems of the NHS, but I think those of us that believe in it still believe that at its best, it's its best health system in the world, free at the point of use. And obviously, Attlee built on the welfare state as well. We should point out, and of course, me and Andy are going to point out that, Attlee was helped by the Beveridge report of the great liberal William Beveridge. But the fact is, the Liberals were in no position to sadly implement it themselves, so it took a Labour government to do so. And I give great credit to Clement Attlee and his administration for bringing in the NHS and the welfare and building on the welfare state. I mean, in many respects, he is a tragic. In many respects, he's a great figure. So it's quite a contradiction in terms for Clement Attlee, really. I mean, again, one of those Labour leaders that wasn't the most kind of charismatic of leaders, which I think
quite reserved, quiet.
Absolutely,
yeah.
So I think, people always used to say that, and people always say that Attlee. What was the phrase that I don't know if it was Churchill's phrase. That a taxi pulled up at Parliament. It was Clement Attlee, but nothing walked out.
An empty taxi.
An empty taxi.
Pulled up to Parliament, and out came Clement Attlee, and it was Churchill. You were
absolutely, which is a very Churchillian turn of phrase.
He was great for way. Yeah.
Compared to Churchill in terms of presence and charisma, he obviously couldn't compete. But you could arguably say that certainly post-war, and we'll come on to Churchill in a moment, but certainly post-war, obviously I don't think anyone would seriously doubt Churchill's achievements as the wartime prime minister. But certainly post-war, I think there's every argument to make that Attlee was a far greater prime minister than Churchill. We mustn't forget as well that, I mean, it's interesting that he got in terms of change, Andy, because actually, obviously, Attlee had been the wartime deputy prime minister, albeit very overshadowed by Churchill. But obviously, that was a wartime coalition that also included a Liberal as part of the administration. So, I think Attlee deserves to go down as one of the great post-war prime ministers.
Okay. So, would you say landslide or strong majority?
I mean, I think you'd have to say landslide. I mean, I think when you think that we created this great institution, the NHS, that we all still rely on today, whatever its problems, I think that I would argue that he should be in the top tier.
I would agree. I was unsure whether to put him as A or S. It was definitely going to be on the top, but I was unsure about because there are issues about, things like he had to devalue the pound, the convertibility, the Panic of 47, the Panic of 49. But he was a good manager. He got Gateskill in as Chancellor and he calmed the markets. And I think you could argue economically, he planted the seeds of what would become the kind of Macmillan, you never had it so good era. So I think there's definitely, I know if Luke was still doing these, he would probably be, I think he'd probably even still give Attlee an A or a B, and he'll argue the economic points. But undoubtedly, things that we enjoy today, like the NHS, expansion of the welfare state, and just the idea of social security and this post-war consensus that unified even the Conservative Party, that was the reason why it's called the consensus. I think overlooking the economics, I'm gonna have to agree, he's gonna have to be S tier. Landslide. Right. And speaking of good old Mr. Churchill, next up is Winston Churchill. Now, as we said, a great wartime leader, brilliant orator, kept Britain's morale during World War II. Now, again, like you said, I think we have to measure this based on post-war Churchill, because I think undoubtedly if we included Churchill's not pre-war, but during the war, I should say, undoubtedly he'd be at the top, undoubtedly. However, this is post-war prime ministers, so sorry, Churchill. I think, sorry to upset you, Churchill. God rest your soul. Dear, you can tell it's been a long day for me. He returned to power in 1951. I'm afraid it was a lot more quieter affair for Churchill. Now, that isn't to say nothing can't be said about Churchill. He didn't reverse any of Attlee's decisions when it came to the welfare state and even nationalisation, which I think says a lot about his natural liberal instincts, because a lot of people forget that he started off as a liberal, then he went conservative, then he went back to liberals, then he went back to the conservatives.
He re-ratted.
But I think so he cemented that post-war consensus. He seemed like quite an effective administrator, allowing his cabinet to effectively take control of their own departments while he tried to repair relations with America and took on more world affairs, which I think was more natural for him. I think he was a more natural foreign policy prime minister than a domestic one. Now, if you watch The Crown, he did bring in the Clean Air Act. Some might argue he was pushed to do the Clean Air Act, to believe The Crown, but you have to take that with a pinch of salt sometimes. They do have creative license, but he did bring in eventually the Clean Air Act. But he was spending more time on holiday. He was drinking more. So I think by that time he was quite tired. And I think it frustrated his cabinet, especially Anthony Eden, who we'll come on to next. But I'll be honest, Matthew, I don't know what's your view. I don't have a lot to say about post-war Churchill other than that. I think he's basically just a steady the ship kind of prime minister, if we're measuring it from post-war. What are your thoughts, Matthew?
Well, I agree, and of course the difficulty is that if you're critical of Churchill, people are shocked because of course there's no doubt that he probably was the only person that could have led us through those war years. But ultimately, this is a post-war prime ministerial tier, and so I would argue that he needs to be pretty near the bottom. I mean, very little happened during those years, and as you say, I mean, I've watched The Crown, and I think as much as that might take some dramatic license, I think
there's some kernel of truth in that.
Yeah, there absolutely is. That by this point he was very old, bless him. He was very tired, and no wonder after leading us through war and the stress of all of that. And very little was achieved during his second term as prime minister, and rightly or wrongly, I think many members of his cabinet, as you say, Anthony Eden, who we'll come on to next, much younger men, people who wanted to get stuff done, became increasingly frustrated with Churchill. Recognise him as a great historical figure, but became increasingly frustrated with him. And so I would argue that, speaking purely in terms of this period of office, 1951 to 1955, it needs to be pretty low down, I would argue.
Okay. We've got backbencher, which is like an EF, and lost the deposit, which is the bin, basically? Or would you put him as a C or hung parliament?
So maybe hung parliament. I mean, I don't want to be too. I feel like I shouldn't. Okay. I feel like we shouldn't. I feel like we shouldn't be too unkind. I feel like we shouldn't be too unkind to him. And as you quite rightly say, we were talking about if we included the war years. I mean, the irony of this is that if we included the war years, he'd be right at the top. But ultimately, this is a post-war prime ministerial tier. And I tried to look up kind of achievements from that period of office, and it was very thin gruel for Churchill's second period as prime minister. So I think kind of just below middle ranking is probably where he should be.
Yeah, I'd agree with what you said. It's just if you read the history books, it was just uneventful. I mean, even when he was like going off around the world, which was more natural to Churchill, there was no great lines. There was no great realignment of foreign policy, because I think Attlee pretty much settled that foreign policy of we're going to be pro-NATO, we're going to be anti-communist. It was probably maybe slightly more aggressive than Attlee, but there was no real difference. He didn't separate himself from Attlee.
No.
Which I think I agree was actually a good thing. I think, he agreed with the post-war consensus, but in terms of what he achieved, it was just very uneventful.
I mean, what you could say, and again, thinking about the Crown, and I mean, obviously I say this as someone who believes that, we shouldn't have a kind of royal family and all the rest of that. But if I put my republicanism... If I pop my republicanism to the side for just a moment, I think you could say that there was a plus for Churchill that obviously shortly before during his time as second time as Prime Minister was when Queen Elizabeth II became Queen, and obviously she was a very, very young woman at that point. And I think she subsequently said in her later years that although she didn't mean this politically, of course, because the monarch supposedly doesn't have a political opinion. But in terms of the person that she most admired and that gave her, advice and that kind of settled her as the new queen, it was absolutely Winston Churchill. So I think actually that is probably one of the main things that he achieved during that time in office. But for me, I'm afraid that doesn't quite... that might have been good for the monarchy and might have even been good for the nation, but it doesn't quite qualify as a political achievement.
No, I'd agree. And I think I've been rewatching Steve Richards' videos, and he talks about teachers. To be a good leader, you have to be a good teacher. And I think Winston Churchill, like Thatcher, Tony Benn, I know he wasn't a prime minister, but they were good teachers. And I think he became a good mentor and teacher to Queen Elizabeth. Is again thrust upon. I mean, the whole family was thrust upon this from the beginnings of the abdication of Edward VII. So I'd agree, but it's not enough. I mean, I think he built a few more council houses. I think he continued that and the rebuilding of Britain, but I don't think anything substantial. So he's still a hung parliament for me. I assume he's still going to be a hung parliament for you.
Absolutely. I think in a sense, the sense that I get reading about this period and watching The Crown and documentaries about this as well was that people perhaps felt that whilst they felt that they needed to elect Clem Attlee to get things like the NHS built and the welfare state and etc. I think I felt a bit sorry that Churchill, who led them through war, was then kind of dumped out of office straight afterwards. And so in a sense, I think he was elected a little bit on a sympathy vote. That, okay, Mr. Churchill, we respect you and we're going to re-elect you, but without any great hope, because bless him of how old and ill he was by this point, without any great hope that he was going to achieve very much in the years thereafter.
Yeah, and I think, he didn't, and eventually he rebranded the Conservative Party to accept the reforms Attlee did. He started the 1945 election being quite hostile to it. I think he said something like, "You'll have to have some kind of Gestapo state," when he talked about all the nationalisation programmes. But eventually he accepted that he was not going to win that argument if he kept frustrating that debate. So, and I think it did say more about his liberal instincts. I think if the Liberals had survived, even as like a strong third force, I think he'd probably still have been a Liberal. He's quite an opportunist person as well, but I think
he was absolutely an opportunist. I mean, in a sense, whatever party he was in, it was the Churchill party. I mean, I think the actual brand, and what kind of rose he was wearing was rosette he was wearing.
He was instinctively one nation.
He absolutely was. I mean, we should also point out, I think it'd be remiss of us not to point out that He had, so I mean, maybe there were the views of the time, and we need to remember that. But he had some quite strange
Oh,
views,
okay.
Churchill, and you know, some of his views in terms of foreign policy and other things were not great, and were not
Yeah.
especially kind of liberal in that sense. But
No.
I mean, he did his job in terms of he got us
Domestic
through
liberalism.
those war years, you know. So yeah, I mean, I think we've been fair to him on this period.
I'd agree. And speaking of cabinet members who were frustrated that Churchill was still knocking around and refusing to go, one particular one he disliked a lot, which was Anthony Eden. In fact, that was partly the reason why he stayed on for so long, because he really did not want Anthony Eden to lead the party. We come on to Mr. Anthony Eden. Now, again, it's tragic because he only survived, I think, a year and a bit, I want to say, or 2 years. Not a lot to say. I think it can be summed up with the Suez Crisis. I don't know if you've got more to say, Mathew, because I'll be honest, I tried my hardest to research Anthony Eden, and there was just nothing. Again, it was like Churchill, he continued the wartime consensus and more council houses. But again, like Churchill, he was obsessed about being a foreign leader. That was his bread and butter. And the thing he tried to model himself on, he was a complete failure with the Suez Crisis. So I don't know if you've got more to say, but I think he's going to have to go pretty low down the list.
Well, I mean, all I've really got to say on him, and just to say on Attlee, that when you think that his consensus, the consensus that he brought about, lasted really until Thatcher in 1979. I mean, that was quite some achievement by Attlee. In terms of Eden, yeah, he spent a little bit like Gordon Brown, who we'll come on to obviously a bit later. You know, spent all that time wanting to be prime minister and lobbying to be prime minister and chivying to be prime minister and decrying the prime minister of the time. And yet, when they got into office, were pretty not very good. But whereas you can say for Gordon Brown, as we will do when we get to him, that you know he saw us through the global economic crisis, which I think is fair as a positive. Sadly for Anthony Eden, all he's remembered for is the Suez Crisis, and that was a major setback for British foreign policy and diplomacy. I mean, I can't think anything other than him being in the lowest tier.
I'd agree. And to be honest, I think Eden was always going to be damned if he did, damned if he didn't, because he was in the Conservative Party. If he had tried to just, we're going to let Egypt have their nationalisation, that would have plagued him. He would have been out then.
Yeah. He was dealt an appalling hand of cards, you know.
Yeah.
But ultimately, this happened during his time in office. It wasn't dealt with well.
No.
And there's very little to counterweight that in terms of domestic achievement.
Backbencher or lost the deposit?
I mean, probably backbencher.
Okay. Where do I go? I'm really torn with this one.
I mean, I guess I would say, I mean, I don't want to start mentioning prime ministers before we get to them, but do I think he's quite as bad as Liz Truss? No, I don't.
That's the bit I'm torn about.
Yeah.
I'll be kind to Eden. I'll say backbencher. But I agree. I agree with that. Next is Mac the Knife, Harold Macmillan. Now, actually, my dad's favourite. Now, he can't remember Harold Macmillan because he was too young. But actually, having read up Harold Macmillan, his favourite post-war Tory prime minister. My dad's on the left. He's a socialist. I'd say socialist by convention. He's a lot more pragmatic than I think than some socialist friends that I know. I'll say I'll just be polite. I'll keep it diplomatic. But my dad's favourite Tory prime minister, he actually built the most council houses of any prime ministers since post-war. I think 500,000 a year was being built. I mean, imagine if we can do that today. We'd solve the housing crisis. He managed to fix relations with America, because obviously the Suez Crisis had consequences with our relationship with America, because it was what was so tragic about Eden and the Suez Crisis is that both the Soviets and the Americans thought it was completely deplorable, and they were both sided against Britain. So he managed to mend relations with America. I think actually JFK was quite fond of Macmillan. I think they actually got on pretty damn well. I think he actually got on. I think from what I've heard, JFK preferred Macmillan than the Labour leader at the time that was his opponent, which you think, being political bedfellows, the Democrats being their version of Labour, you'd think, oh, naturally they would get on with Hugh. I think it was Hugh Gaitskell was leader at the time, but you think naturally they would have got on with Hugh Gaitskell, but apparently not. He got on more with Macmillan. He had this one nation sensibility. He wrote this brilliant book called The Middle Way, in which he actually spoke about interventionist policy. He was not opposed to nationalisation when markets failed or just could not meet the demand of public needs. He continued the post-war consensus. Again, he built the most council houses under his leadership. I think his setbacks is unfortunate because his setbacks was often about his class, which is why I always think to say to people, it's not about your background, it's about your values. I mean, Tony Benn came from an aristocratic background. But I think Macmillan, he was a very decent man, a true statesman, quite maybe a bit stuffy today. I think he was plagued by that. I mean, the 60s comedy was becoming, satire was becoming a thing, and it was just, it was a punchline for every joke because of his stuffy, sort of aristocratic, cotton balls in mouth kind of, Odeonian sort of fellow. I would put him as a solid B. I think he had issues that was beyond his own realm, with the perfumer affair, which kind of started this media's obsession with sex scandals. And obviously, I think that helped News of the World a lot to gain a lot of traction in its circulation. I'd put Macmillan as a solid B. Decent Prime Minister, decent human being. He colonised more. I think he started to decolonise the British Empire. Again, probably against a lot of conservative instincts, but he just understood the reality at the time. Did fail and gain us into Europe because of but again, I don't know how much you can blame that on Macmillan, because I think Charles de Gaulle was always going to reject British entry into the European common market. But yeah, I'd say a solid B. I'd say a solid B for me. What about you, Matthew? What do you have to say about Mac the Knife?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with you there, Andy, and I think you're quite right. His biggest domestic achievement probably was council houses, and yeah, you're absolutely right. What did it were that we could build that many today? And in terms of foreign policy, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's difficult to remember now quite how frail and badly torn the UK relationship with the US was after Suez. I mean, it's called the Suez Crisis, and I think it's so long ago for people that they don't quite realise how much of a crisis it was. It really was. It could have seen a permanent breach between the UK and the US. Harold Macmillan deserves great credit for the fact that it didn't. And I think he was seen as a bit of a father figure to JFK on the international scene. And yeah, I mean, mentor. And I gather they got on very well, and that was really important for this country. And he was, as you say, an old style one nation conservative. And again, would that it were that we had some of those around today. So I mean, I put him pretty high up. I think he was a good prime minister.
So strong majority, which is like an A, or slim majority, which is like a B?
I mean, probably slim majority, I would have thought. I hope we're not being too unkind to him there.
No, I'm just a bit worried that we are pretty much similar at the moment, so might not be, maybe we'll get a bit more conflict in the next one. And the next one being, this one, I don't think we're going to get much conflict at all, is Alec Douglas Hume, which is, before Liz Truss, would have been a footnote in pub quizzes about who was one of those prime ministers that you'd never remember. But I think we will remember Liz Truss for a little while, but I think over time we will forget about it. But Alec Douglas Hume was that original pub quiz trivia. I think he only did just over a year, or just under a year.
I think he did exactly a year.
Maybe he did exactly a year.
Yeah, 365 days according to.
Maybe you can lead on this. So explain the circumstances in which Alec Douglas Hume became Prime Minister and why he lasted a year.
Yeah. So basically, Macmillan thought that he was much iller than he turned out to be. Actually lived for quite a time after, and so he resigned as Prime Minister. And just one more thing on Macmillan: if you recognise that name, not necessarily from him, but from Macmillan the publishers, well, that is him, and that was his family. Was his family business. And so there's a great show. I was watching it just the other day, actually, of how to be a former. A report by the great Michael Cockrell of the BBC on how to be an ex-prime minister, and it shows you Macmillan with the book. It shows you Macmillan with the book that he'd written, and how he was a great promoter because he was holding it up to look at it like this. When I don't think his eyesight was really bad, but yeah. So Macmillan had a great dry sense of humour in that sense. Alec Douglas, I mean, what can you say? Look, we shouldn't really be personal, should we? But I think someone famously said that he looked like a walnut. He looked like a skull with a bit of skin draped over it. I mean, God bless his heart. He may well have been a very nice man, and I'm sure he was. But just out of touch, aristocrats. Nothing much more to say. Prime Minister for just a year, which by this just standard is a pretty long time, but actually in the general sweep of history really isn't. And yeah, I mean, not very much more to say about him than that. Andy.
Well, I think unlike Liz Truss, he didn't damage things. It wasn't like he wasn't a bull in a china shop.
Didn't shock the markets, no.
Yes.
No.
From what I gather, he was an aristocrat. It just seemed very old hat the way. I mean, the Tory party back then, they used to basically nominate a leader rather than elect a leader. And they had emerging younger, more dynamic people like Heseltine, Edward Heath, kind of entrepreneurial or working class Tory members, but instead they go for the land gentry aristocrat. Now, from what I've been told, he actually had a terrific sense of humour. He was actually quite good, and he surprised in the election. He surprised a lot of people that he actually did a lot better than people fought against Harold Wilson, who was just seen as a dynamite for absolutely destroying, the sort of stuffiness and the aristocratic nature of the Tory party. But from what I've been told, he was again he just didn't have a chance though. He was but he's a one nation Tory.
Yeah,
an aristocrat who probably did have values, but he just did not. I think he's going to have to be either backbench or lost the deposit for me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think he should go necessarily as low down as Liz Truss, who I think we'll be having to keep mentioning because of how short she was, how short a length of time she was Prime Minister. But ultimately, she damn near destroyed the economy, and I don't think you can claim that of Alec Douglas, so I think that he should go in the one above the lowest one.
Okay, I'm going to put him the same. So one above lost their deposit. So sorry, Mr. Alec, or should say the 13th. I can't remember his title now. Anyway, you're backbencher.
That's the thing as well, Andy, of course, and this is to his credit, is that because you couldn't be Prime Minister from the Lords by this point, quite right too, he had to leave the Lords and stand for the Commons.
And he did do that, and he did become an MP in his own right. And maybe it's in Iain's book. Well, there we go. We're connecting it all together like a jigsaw puzzle. I feel like I saw that, but maybe I'm misremembering it from my chat with Michael. Anyway, right. So we've had Harold Macmillan, but now another Harold comes into play. Harold Wilson. So he came in 1964. The man who doxed in a shiny sort of lab coat Macintosh, promising to modernise Britain's economy with the right heat of this revolution, as he would say. That was awful. I'm really sorry. That was an awful impression. Not as good as my Maggie, which I won't torment on this video for you, Matthew, I promise.
Good.
I would say on the economy, there was nothing substantial in his economic achievements. He had so much high hopes going in. Even the Tory press had high hopes. They were quite favourable to Wilson in the 60s. They thought in his early premiership, they thought, oh well, he might modernise the economy, he might look a bit more entrepreneurial. But a lot of it, I think, was just all like presentation, high inflation, strikes, again, pound devaluation, balance of trade, and just a sense that there was this, at least in the 60s, this sense of decay. And then by the 70s, more decay. However, on social policies, he was very good and had lasting achievements. He legalised divorce, decriminalisation of homosexuality, abortion reforms, removing the last of the post-war censorship, which I didn't know. There was still post-war censorship back then. I only learned that today in my research. And obviously, in foreign policy, keeping us out of Vietnam, which I think a certain other Prime Minister could have learned a lot of lessons about. Spoilers, folks. But So yeah, I think those were some of his biggest achievements. It's just depressing, really, that I would say, actually, no, I'd say his biggest achievement is that he managed to keep the Labour Party and the Labour government together when you had so many big, contrasting personalities: Roy Jenkins, Tony Benn, Michael Foot, Anthony Crossland,
Barbara Castle.
Barbara Castle.
Mm.
That is his legacy. It could have completely fallen apart, and yet Howard Wilson managed to keep it functional and actually kept the country functional. I mean, France, they were literally having student protests and strikes, and I think even the economic inachievements, if that's a word, I don't know if that's a word, but I think the fact that he managed to keep the country patched up in such difficult circumstances, I think is one to be recognised. So I'm going to have a little think of where to put him, but maybe, Mathew, you can give us your thoughts on Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Yeah, so a number of points on him. I mean, I've in my little notes here that I've made, I've said that in many respects, certainly after Alec Douglas, Wilson was the first kind of modern prime minister. I mean, he's the first prime minister that most people can remember back to, unless you're considerably older. And so I think in that sense, he brought a dynamism with him. He was the first kind of TV prime minister, Harold Wilson, a very good communicator, not above, doing a bit of show that's not necessarily the truth, in the sense that it says in the Crown, and I do believe that this to be, actually really the case, that yeah, he smoked a pipe on TV, but actually it was cigars behind the scenes. So but he knew that cigars wouldn't look very good on, for this supposedly working class hero, Harold Wilson. So
apparently the Queen's favourite prime minister. Wow.
Certainly one of the Queen's favourite prime ministers. I think probably after Churchill, they got on very well. You wouldn't have expected them to necessarily, but they did get on very well together, apparently. Look, don't forget also as well the small matter that Harold Wilson won 4 elections out of 5.
True.
Mean, not even Blair, did that, or even Thatcher, albeit that they were prime minister for long. They were prime minister for longer, of course.
I mean, there was 2 of them were slim majorities, and one equals in a minority government.
Indeed, so that's absolutely true. He also has a number of other achievements, including the Open University and really expanding education in that sense. I think on the social ones, I mean, ultimately he was the prime minister, and so if he hadn't wanted them to happen, he could have said that they weren't going to happen. But also, I think on the social reforms that you mentioned, a lot of credit goes to Roy Jenkins, his Home Secretary, who went on later to be the Lib Dem leader in the House of Lords.
He was just a traditional liberal. He was a very liberal person. He was
very liberal, and in my view, he was our best ever Home Secretary. And also, don't forget on abortion, again, Roy Jenkins put it through as Home Secretary, and so Wilson has to take credit. He was the Prime Minister at the time. But also, we mustn't forget that it was ultimately through a private member's bill by the Liberal MP at the time.
Liberal, yeah.
Yeah. So David Steele. So I mean, lots of achievements to Harold Wilson's credit. Some things on the downside as well, for sure. But I think he was a substantial prime minister, and so I'd put him pretty near the top.
Oh, okay. So we got landslide strong majority. Sorry.
Do you not think?
I mean, I think economically he came in with such high hopes, and even we mentioned Roy Jenkins already. Now, there was obviously the pound devaluation in 1967, which he had to do. But Roy Jenkins came in as Chancellor. Now, the economy was beginning to do a lot better. In fact, it was doing a lot more better. But there was talk that actually, under the showdown between Heath and Wilson, that Wilson might win in the election again and might even get quite a strong majority because of the tough decisions Roy Jenkins had to do as Chancellor. And I think it does make me think, even the times where the economy was doing well, how much can I actually place that on Harold Wilson? Now, that is probably to his skill for Wilson, because he was balancing a cabinet where there was these competing forces, these really big beasts in politics, and he decided, really, he played politics but didn't play politics. He put people who he thought was going to be good for the job, while at the same time balancing his cabinet. So he didn't have all this.
It's really funny, Andy, because again, it was something that I was watching the other day. You know, I love watching some of these old political documentaries on YouTube. They're fantastic. And I saw one again. I think it was another Michael Cockrell report. His films are really, really worth watching. Harold Wilson, and as you say, I mean, when you think of all the big beasts in Harold Wilson's cabinet, I mean, you know, you've got a number of potential. None of them became prime minister, but you've got a number of potential prime ministers there. I mean, Barbara Castle, you know, Roy Jenkins, Tony Benn, Tony Crosland. I mean, these were really substantial Labour figures. And Tony Benn was recalling that in this documentary, Michael Cockrell, was that, you know, Harold Wilson hated the fact that there were all of these leaks out of cabinet, but then, ironically, held a cabinet to complain about the leaks. And then they all went out at lunch to get lunch when cabinet, a very long day of cabinet. So they all went out to get lunch. Saw a copy of the London Evening Standard, and there on the front page of the Standard was Harold Wilson lectures cabinet over leaks. And so they all went back into cabinet and said, "Hang on, Harold, how come?" And he said, "Oh yes, I don't know how they've got hold of that." Well, of course, the suggestion being that Harold Wilson or his people had themselves leaked what was said in cabinet that morning. So I just love anything like that. I absolutely love that. I mean, I'd put him not at the top, but pretty near the top. I thought it was a substantial prime minister.
I think if I was to measure it, because Harold Wilson, he was elected in the 60s, and then he had a brief period when it was Heath, and then it was back to Wilson. If I was allowed to split Wilson in two, I'd say 60s Wilson, he'd go with Macmillan. I think he did pretty good, substantial thing, especially on social policy in terms of like we said, liberal reforms and the economy, even after the 67. I mean, ironically, my ex-boyfriend's dad, he's an economist teacher. He is a Tory, but he actually said the devaluation, he was right to say the pound in your pocket hasn't devalued. He was trying to make the point, but actually it hasn't lost its value. What we're doing is we're trying to make it more competitive for our exports. And he thought it was totally unfair how and this is from a Tory economist who, you know, knows his economy, and he thought it was unfair. He thought Wilson got a crap time on that. But so 60s Wilson, I think, would be a B, slim majority up there with Macmillan. If maybe even no, I'm not going to say strong majority, but definitely with Macmillan. Now 70s Wilson, by that point he was so paranoid about. Now some of it was true about the Secret Service, but he became so paranoid and he was so tired with the infighting of his party. I think he was naturally a social democrat. I don't think he wanted Labour to move to the left, but by then the membership had pretty much dictated policy, and I would probably put him quite low. So would you put okay? All right, so options: landslide, strong majority.
Yeah. So just tell me the options again.
So you've got landslide at the top, which currently has Mr. Attlee. Strong majority, which has no one on yours. Slim majority, hung parliament, backbencher, lost their deposit.
And who have we got on slim majority at the moment?
With Mac the knife.
Yeah, so you see, I think it was far more substantial than. I think it's got to go in the second rung, I think. No, I know, but I wouldn't. I think, yeah.
Okay. Strong majority then. Yep. I'm going to put him with Macmillan.
Controversial.
And if I was slim majority, but I think above Macmillan. I think he was pretty decent. Again, if I could divide it into, I nearly did consider that. If I was to divide his premierships, I'd say 60s, pretty good. Till Wilson's, yes. But 70s, and through no fault of his own sometimes. I mean, the oil crisis. I mean, I do argue that point. There was an international oil crisis, much like Gordon Brown, but he was tired. He just had no energy. He was obsessed with the Secret Service, which partly some of it was true.
I think, I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing with Wilson as well, was that he became paranoid, but you could argue he was understandably kind of paranoid, given some of what was going on, and also, and again, I've no idea whether this began when he was in office or not, and I wouldn't like to suggest that it did. But he later suffered quite badly with Alzheimer's, and whether there was any beginnings of that during his time in office, I don't know. But regardless of that, he was very tired in his second administration, and that was why, you know, he then handed over to good old Jim Callaghan.
Indeed, and often people say he was very cunning, Very cunning man. I would say strategic. I think
Yeah,
cunning
absolutely.
sounds quite sinister. I think he was just strategic, but skilled operator. Right.
Very.
We come on to the man who would become his Disraeli, or maybe his Gladstone, the famous duel between Harold Wilson and Mr. Edward Heath. Now, could not have picked a worse time to be Prime Minister. We were seeing rolling strikes, the beginnings of the energy crisis. He did take us into Europe, into the European common markets, which I think needs to be recognised. If you're a Europhile like me and Matthew, I'm sure that was a great achievement. If you're not, then you probably think Mr. Heath is just terrible and should be in the bin. Although he didn't do it through very honest means, I'm not going to lie. He basically just got us signed up to Europe without a vote, so much so that it forced Labour to have a referendum. But Mr. Heath, any thoughts on Mr. Edward Heath?
Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting, Andy. I've a soft spot for Ted Heath because he did do that major thing, a major positive thing from both of our perspectives of taking us into Europe. And I mean, goodness knows what he would have made of Brexit. I mean, I should have think. But certainly from a pro-European perspective, obviously people who are against Europe would have a very different view on this. But ultimately, it's me and you that are doing this this tier list. They can do their own. I think were it not for Europe, he'd be very low down. I'd put him somewhere middling because I think that singular achievement of taking us into Europe is a historic one for which he should be very fondly remembered. On economics, it's really interesting, Andy, actually, because in a way he was Thatcher before Thatcher, but just didn't quite have the drive to push those reforms through. Now, obviously, those are reforms in many respects that I would have opposed, but from his perspective, he came in with all of that drive to change the economy. But didn't quite have what it took to take on the trade unions, the all-powerful trade unions of the time. And so, in effect, kind of didn't bother with all of those reforms, put it in the too hard spot. And so, in many other respects, was a pretty pitiful prime minister. But I think the singular achievement of Europe, I would argue, that means that he should be somewhere kind of middling in the list.
Slim Parliament with Macmillan or hung Parliament with Churchill?
Yeah, that's difficult, isn't it? What do you think?
I mean,
in many respects, I think, and again, this is just Churchill's second administration we're talking about. We're not talking about the war years, but I think he achieved more than did Churchill.
If it helps you, I'm going to put it. I can't put him with Anthony Eden and Alec Douglas-Home. I'm tempted because I think he dithered on direction. He was Thatcher before Thatcher, but then he retreated. Now, I think part of it was due to his one nation instinct, which I think for me is someone who, as you know, I have liberal instincts, so of course I would prefer one nation Tories than Thatcher Tories or whatever the rest. But it seemed as dithering. There was the cry Northern Ireland that began to brew. It just got louder and louder.
And also, of course,
he did try to solve Northern Ireland, but
yeah, absolutely. And also, of course, Andy, he was prime minister for, according to Wikipedia, 3 years and 259 days. It wasn't a very long administration.
No.
And then of course he held an election in 1974 under the kind of the question of who governs, and the country said not you, Mr. Heath,
mate.
So kind of he has the plus of the fact that no one thought he'd win the 1970 election, and he did. That's to his credit. But then 3 and a bit years later, he lost the 74 election. I mean, I think, and I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think the singular achievement of taking us into Europe is a historic achievement that not many other prime ministers achieve. And so even if that's the only good thing he did do that.
With Churchill then, or Macmillan?
What do you think?
Well, I mean, I wish there was a section in between the other sections. Half of me wants to put him with Anthony Eden, but I just can't do that. I do agree he's going to go. He'll hung Parliament. He's going to go with Churchill. I think he achieved a lot with Europe, and I agree on. But he's going to be below Churchill. I think he was pretty close to being quite useless. Really, would you say the same?
Yeah, I agree.
There we go. Right. Oh,
this is really fun. This is really fun. I'm totally loving this. It's great.
Thank you. I'm glad I got you into tier lists. Maybe you can join the Liberal Leader one sometime.
That'd be great.
Yeah, yeah, and less of them as well. Well, we hope anyway, unless we start having resignations and Tory style changes. Right, so yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying this, Matthew. I told you there'd be fun.
Yeah.
Right, so I'm going to let you take the reins on this because we mentioned we might still do a video on the legacy of Jim Callaghan. Maybe that could be its own thing. But for now, Jim Callaghan, because I remember you, Matthew, in one of our debates. I think it was to do with Thatcher, or possibly, yeah, it was the Thatcher debate. You said, I think we need to have a re-evaluation of Jim Callaghan. Can't remember the exact quote, but you basically said, I think we should look back at the Jim Callaghan years more fondly. So, explain yourself.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, what I mean by that is that I think even more than Wilson, you know, he held Labour together when it really could have split asunder during those
Agreed.
last few years of the 1970s. And look, you know, I mean, obviously people are going to remember the going tap and hand to the IMF and all of that. And you know, and that's not good.
But you paid off.
Yeah, but actually, I agree with you when you earlier said that I think had Jim Callaghan won the '79 election, and ultimately he was never going to do that because of the winter of discontent and the role. I mean, I'm a big trade union person. I'm a member of a trade union, but back then they really were arguably almost anti-democratic. They almost considered themselves more powerful than the elected government of the day, and that really wasn't good. And so I blame the trade unions for Labour's defeat more than I blame Jim Callaghan, to be honest. I thought that he was a very honourable Prime Minister. And I agree with you that I think if Callaghan had won the '79 election, he'd have brought in changes, some of which might well have been similar to Thatcher's, but in a much more compassionate way for those communities that Thatcher didn't give a toss about, if I can put it like that, and that are still affected as a result of that to this very day in parts of the north and parts of the Midlands and Scotland and elsewhere and Wales.
Mm.
So I think James Callaghan played a very difficult set of cards as well as he could do. And also don't forget that this is obviously isn't just about his time as Prime Minister, but don't forget that still to this day, he's still the only person to uphold all four of the great offices of state. He was Prime Minister, he was Foreign Secretary, he was Home Secretary, and he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. That is a singular achievement that probably won't be repeated. And so I think he was he was a substantial Prime Minister that just had a bloody awful set of circumstances.
I think I would agree with you. I would agree with you, Matthew. I'm going to contradict myself a little bit because I think Jim Callaghan personally would have done the reforms, but I still think he would have been plagued with the Labour left. I think one of the unfortunate circumstances of why the SDP and Roy Jenkins never became Prime Minister, who I think they basically detoxified fringes of the Labour left to form the SDP and the Liberal Alliance. I think Roy Jenkins was most certainly have done union reforms. In fact, if you read old manifestos, they don't talk a lot about privatisation. They just talk about a Scandinavian model, whatever that means. It's a bit fluffy, typical fluffy manifesto. So, Mr. Callaghan.
So, yeah, so I mean, I think he does still need to go pretty low down because ultimately, his time in office was pretty disastrous. My argument is just that what more could he have done? He played a terrible set of hands as well as he possibly could. That's my argument.
I'd say for me, his legacy is like Harold Wilson, and I think like you more so. He kept Labour together. He kept Labour together, functioning, not the most functioning government of all, but it stopped it descending into this complete chaos that it could have been.
And I'd just point out as well, and you know, I mean, I'm fond of Tony Benn like many people, and he became this kind of grandfatherly figure. But back then, he was a bloody disruptive force in Labour politics, and a thorn in the side of Labour leaders, and not helpful, to put it at its mildest. And so again, you know, the fact that Callaghan was able to keep Labour Party together, yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it that in the vote of confidence that preceded the '79 general election, I mean, it was a bit pitiful in as much as the Labour whips were having to literally get Labour MPs out of hospital to come into the Commons and
Yeah.
and vote. I mean, ultimately, by as much as I think most of us on the centre left and left now kind of rued the day that Thatcher came in. The fact is that Labour government was absolutely tired out by the time of that election in 1979. I think most of the country thought that whilst they a little bit like, we'll come on to John Major in a few minutes, but a little bit like John Major,
Yeah.
I think people thought of Jim Callaghan that they liked him as a person, but that the government he led was just out of time and out of luck. And so so I'm afraid he probably has to go pretty low down. Not very low down, but pretty low down.
So the bottom half, we've got hung Parliament, backbencher, or lost their deposits.
So who's on backbencher at the moment?
Eden and Mr. Douglas Hume.
Yeah, I mean, I think he probably does need to go there or the one above.
Which fig?
Maybe the
I know
one
where mine
above.
going. One above.
Yeah.
Okay, hung Parliament. I'm going to be mean. I'm going to put him as a backbencher, but I am going to put him above I am going to put him above. If I was doing it in some kind of ordering, I would put him above Anthony Eden. Not to knock him, I think it was just circumstances. But if I'm being objective, I mean, it's obviously a subjective list anyway. But even objectively, he did not achieve a lot. But I can also, I was torn between the two. I was torn between hung Parliament, to be fair. But I think maybe keep it more exciting, because I know you're good. I know Peter's been reposting. You might be a bit sad if our lists were too similar. But there we go.
Peter Just, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's what. Right. So Thatcher. Right. So
we've done a whole
Thatcher.
video on her.
We have done a whole video, so I think that we don't have to say a lot. I do think she's a lot more having done research, I think she was a lot more pragmatic in the early years, which I didn't know.
In the beginning. Yeah.
She didn't always go on her instincts, like she allowed Michael Heseltine to regenerate Liverpool. Obviously, she lost that in the end years. Again, if you like someone like my uncle said, at least she got things done. When at least she was, and I think that is lacking in leaders today. Now, I think that can be a weakness as well, but she was a strong, convicted politician. I think she did need to shake up the country because it was just looking ungovernable and uncompetitive at times. I think there did need to be reforms on tax regimes and stuff like that. But again, like Callaghan, I think it would have come anyway, whether it was Callaghan or Roy Jenkins. I think the harshness, cruelty, the uncompromisingness of it all was, and the deepness of it all was just like it was too radical for my liking anyway. But she did put us in a good international standing, like Cold War politics, the Falklands War. She became so strident after the Falklands War. But again, not even Michael Foot agreed in military intervention in the Falklands War. So she was not. She gets the credit, but I think that would have probably happened under Callaghan government anyway. Again, it's just, for me, it's the harshness and cruelty of her policies, how draconian, the speedy response, the speediness of it all, that really destroyed communities, especially the deindustrialized communities. And I think, sadly, there's that link. She does have a legacy. We still feel a legacy in terms of the free market, but I think to a downside, we've got a lingering legacy is the polarization of politics. I think she created those conditions. And this British exceptionalism, this idea that we should be suspicious of international bodies like the EU, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, social policy, Section 28, curbing civil liberties, even immigration controls. I mean, I'm pretty much close to open borders when it comes to immigration, guys, but that's just my view. I think she started the seeds on that. And this is going to be difficult because objectively, she's up there with Attlee. She is up there with Attlee. She revolutionized politics and the country. But again, there is going to be, well, it's our list anyway. If you want to, like Mathew said, if you want to do your own list, you can do your own list. But I'm going to let you come in because I'm quite curious where you're going to put her, because I've got a bit of conflict with her, because I think she is like, as I always say, she is like Marmite, love or hate her.
She absolutely is. I mean, there's no doubt that she is a very substantial political figure. She was Prime Minister for 11 years and 209 days, the longest serving Prime Minister in the 20th century. And as I've just said, at the end of the Callaghan Labour government, Labour was tired and the country was tired. We'd just had the winter of discontent, 78, 79. And yeah, I mean, the government of the time, and Thatcher famously said in one of her interviews, didn't she? More than one of her interviews, that at the time it just seemed that the government of Britain was all about managing decline, and that all we had to hope for was kind of slowing down the decline in the coming years. She would have none of that. And she believed that the economy could be turned around, and there's no doubt that she did turn it around. The trouble was that too often she was uncompromising, and she left communities in parts of the Midlands, like where I live, and parts of the North and Scotland and Wales, destroyed, and many of which have still not recovered all these decades since. And that is a pretty baleful legacy for her. So it's really difficult because she was a very, very substantial figure. But whereas I'd argue that whereas Attlee built up in terms of the NHS and the welfare state, she tore down, and so I just don't think I can allow her, in my view, to be in the same space as Attlee.
Okay, so let's go back to yours. So landslide, strong majority, slim majority, hung parliament, backbencher, or lost their deposit. And you could be as brutal as you want if you want, Mathew. I mean,
look, I'm going to be fair. I'm going to be fair. I think she needs to go in the second tier.
Okay. Interesting. With Mr. Wilson, a lot higher than I thought you were going to give her. I'll be honest.
You see, I can be fair. You see.
Ooh. Well, I'm going to feel like a dick now. People's going to think, "Oh, Andy, you're being such a dickhead." Right. Well, this is tough. If I'm being. No, I'm gonna keep this interesting. I'm gonna put her with Mr. Wilson. I'm gonna give her slim majority a B, so she's third. The reason why is that I don't disagree. She was substantial. She was a steward. She had a sense of public decency. She did, like Attlee, she revolutionised the country, which has been long lasting. However, I think history will look back, judge the consequences of that a lot more critically, because I think it led to the financial crash, the sort of city boom that happened. I think she had very unpopular policies like the poll tax, like Section 28. And whereas Thatcher, I think now we learn more. She was quite pragmatic. She didn't always go on her free market instincts, like with Heseltine, with helping redevelop Liverpool. She was quite happy to have managed decline, which was being advised to her. So those are things, not her personal quality. I think her personal quality, she was a steward who had a sense of public duty. And like my uncle, at least you knew where you stood with her. She had a set of beliefs and ideas, and
yeah, absolutely. And in many respects, Andy, I was just sat here thinking that in many respects, we do still live partly in Attlee's Britain and partly in Thatcher's Britain. But I would argue that Attlee's Attlee's legacy is much more positive than hers.
Yes, and that's for me been the push and pull factor. I think if I was being a historian, I'd probably say she has to go with Attlee because it was revolutionary. That would be non-party political. But yeah. Right, so next on, we've got John Major. Now, I actually have a lot of time for John Major. I think he carefully rehabilitated the Conservative Party's image immediately after Margaret Thatcher's departure. I actually think he had a lot more substance on his one nation conservatism and liberal conservatism than I think Cameron did, who hopefully we might go on to. He abolished the poll tax. I think that needs to be credited. And he began to actually put money in the health service because I think he understood there was actually a public need to start putting money into public services. Now, he didn't do enough of it, but at least it was a start. And I think it laid the foundations for Labour, who would obviously put a lot more money into public services. He signed the Maastricht Treaty, which saw greater integration into Europe. And he got us some concessions to help feed off the Eurosceptic part of his party. And I think his leadership style was a lot less aggressive than Thatcher. He just seemed like a very decent, humble, statesman-like gentleman. But obviously there was Black Wednesday, which I think would have happened under any government, to be fair, but still, they decided to go into the exchange rate mechanism, so the fault's on them. There was the Tory sleaze as well that riddled through his government, and his leadership was plagued of infighting over Europe, which continues to obsess the Conservative Party. I think much of it you can blame on Thatcher, but he was unable to escape that under his leadership. Repossessions rates went up under him as well. So even though they did have this golden legacy under Ken Clarke, it does need worth mentioning that actually there were tough times for a lot of people after the 80s boom. Again, you should probably pin the blame on Thatcher for that. He just inherited the fallout. And even botched privatisation, like privatisation of rail, which even a lot of conservatives voters at the time thought was unnecessary. And of course, the privatisation of water, which we're still reeling from that legacy today. I mean, you can't have competition if you can't choose your water company, I say. But still, I do have a bit of time for John Major. Yeah. Your thoughts, Mathew. Your thoughts. Bit of an interesting one, John Major.
Well, it is. I mean, this is we've come to the first Prime Minister where I started being interested in politics. I started becoming interested in politics at about the age of 14 in 1994, when John Major was the Prime Minister. And it's really interesting looking back on that, because actually, whilst I never minded him particularly, I thought his government was terrible. And he famously referred to some of his cabinet members as bastards, albeit he didn't think he was being recorded at the time. And at the time, I mean, subsequently, subsequent governments have been much worse. But at the time, I thought this was like the worst government kind of ever. But I think on reflection, I guess in a sense, if I could judge John Major apart from separately to the government that he led, I'd judge him much more favourably. But the fact is, he led the government that he led, and that was pretty terrible. The John Redwoods and the Michael Portillos and all of that. So, and as you say, there was Black Wednesday. I mean, again, the great irony about John Major is that he won a victory that no one thought was good. Everyone thought that Neil Kinnock was going to win and Labour were going to win in 1992, and Major won. But because then Black Wednesday happened straight after that, it was almost as if, again, I've seen a TV documentary about the Major years when Major went to the 1992 conference, the conference after they'd won, and it was almost as if they'd lost the previous election. He got I don't know if thanks is the right word, but he got kind of no bounce at all because Black Wednesday happened. So he was a bit unfortunate in that sense, and then of course went on in 1997 to lead the Tories to their worst defeat ever. So it's very much a mixed bag. I mean, again, I think he needs to be pretty somewhere in the middle, really, is what I want to talk. A big plus is that he began, and even Tony Blair has said this, and Bill Clinton and others, he began the Northern Ireland peace process, and we shouldn't forget that.
That is true. That is true. Blair sort of inherited that legacy, really. He did start the peace process at a time when Thatcher seemed unwavering to sort of sit down and have dialogue. So this is mine. Let's go back to yours, Mr. Major. So I assume he's not going to be with Attlee landslide. So
no.
Strong majority, slim majority, or hung parliament, or does he go as backbench?
So who's in slim majority?
For you, it is Harold Macmillan.
Yeah, I mean, probably. Yeah, probably. I would have thought. There.
Very fair. Major. Now, I think I'd also say slim majority. So for me, he's there with Thatcher, Wilson, and Macmillan. Now, I would put, again, if I was to do this in some kind of order, I would put him above Margaret Thatcher, because I think he saw a sense that there needed to be public money being put into services. He was less hostile in Europe. I think for me, that makes him a lot more favourable for me. But yeah. And next, the one who would end up upsetting John Major in 1997 is the very things can only get better, Tony Blair. Well,
very
I couldn't do a
Thatcher
impersonation, so I couldn't do a Thatcher impersonation again, so I thought I'd torment you with my singing. So there we go, once per video. So Tony Blair. Now, I'm going to let you, because you were a Labour member at the time of Tony Blair, so I'm going to let you lead. I'm going to let you lead on this.
Yeah, so I was, and I was a big fan of, as I say, I really didn't like as much as I didn't particularly mind John Major as a person, I thought the government that he led was pretty darn dreadful. And so, to have this young, vibrant, so good looking, smiley Tony Blair appear, this new kind of young, thrusting leader of the Labour Party was very exciting at the time. Yeah, so I joined Labour in 1998 as soon as I could, and I was 18. In fact, I think I joined before that, but I voted for them for the first time, obviously, when I was 18. And yeah, I mean, I remember that a new dawn has broken, has it not? And they set in 1997, and it really did. You really did feel that you were suddenly living in kind of a young country again, a new country, and kind of new Britannia, and all of that. Now, so I mean, I'd split Tony Blair's time in office up into two sections. So I think there was pre 9/11 and post 9/11. I think pre 9/11, where it was all about investing in public services and peace in Northern Ireland, which yet he inherited some of that from John Major, but he had to take it over the line, and he did that. Compared to post 9/11, which led to the invasion, the war in Afghanistan, then the invasion of Iraq. And I mean, it's interesting as we're recording this that Tony Blair is trying to kind of have a different punctuation to his time in the Middle East by now being on this new board that is going to apparently oversee Gaza.
April Fools has come early.
But yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why he's doing that, Andy, is because he knows that his legacy at the moment, despite all the good things that he did, which he did, he put money invested in public services, peace in Northern Ireland, the action in Bosnia, which I think was a just action. All of that is absolutely overshadowed by the shadow of Iraq. And I think he wants to try and have some kind of, I don't think he's going to be successful in this, but I don't think, because I think Iraq will be his legacy regardless, whatever he achieves with Trump in the Middle East now. But he wants to try and have some kind of different punctuation mark in the Middle East. And of course, I wish him well in terms of Gaza. That situation is horrendous. But I think in terms of his time as Prime Minister, again, a bit like Thatcher, a Marmite character, clearly a substantial Prime Minister. I mean, he was Prime Minister for 10 years in 57 days. So, if it wasn't for Iraq, I'd probably have him at the top. I just think Iraq means that he can't be that high up.
So you're thinking a strong majority?
Yeah, I left Labour over Iraq in 2002. I thought it was appalling, and so yeah, I think were it not for that, I'd absolutely argue for him being at the top. But I just think that means that he can't be there.
I agree. A strong majority, which is like the A grade. I think he was pretty good. I wasn't. Now, the private financial initiative, I wasn't unopposed to it, but I do think that it was done. In some sectors, it was unnecessary, didn't need to be done, and I think it was done wrong. I think I like choices. I think people should have choice, but I think you can have choice in the public sphere. I'm not opposed to if you want to go another GP. I don't think it needs. And I think if the capacity issues, we could use private, but it needs to be as a substitute, and then you fix the thing you're focusing on. So. He's so tainted on his foreign policy. I think it has had damaging impacts on our world politics with what's going on with Syria. It's just created this domino effect. And he's quite a Macbethian figure. He has had this great rise and tragic downfall. But yeah, I agree with you, Matthew. A strong majority, which is like our A. Now, his rival, or at least if we believe the media, although it has been confirmed, Gordon Brown. He's another one. I've got a bit like Jim Callaghan. I've got quite a lot of time for Gordon Brown. I think a lot of the public services and the money going and the economy was due to his stewardship as Chancellor. And I think that often gets neglected by Blairites. Blairites like to say, Tony Blair was brilliant. It all failed under Gordon Brown. But we forget that Gordon Brown was the Chancellor. He was the Chancellor. And he was kind of unofficially the Deputy Prime Minister in a lot of ways. So, Matthew, your thoughts on Gordon Brown?
Yeah, well, this is interesting, isn't it? Because as people who are regular watchers of your wonderful channel will know, if they watched your very kind interview with me about kind of my life and times, they'll know that Gordon Brown was a prime minister that I actually met and that I interviewed during my time as a journalist. So it's interesting from that perspective, albeit that I don't think he was especially thrilled to be having to do interviews that day. I think he was a wee bit grumpy, but I don't hold that against him. He was having a tough time of it. But I've got a lot of time for Gordon Brown. He's one of those people, a little bit like Theresa May, Andy, that I've got a lot of time for him as a post-prime minister. Right. I think his time as prime minister wasn't that great. I think he was another one of those who spent all that time, a little bit like, what was it, Anthony Eden, I think, who spent all that time lobbying to become prime minister and then didn't seem to quite know what to do with it when he had the office. Now, I think a little bit like Ted Heath, albeit a very different issue, but like Ted Heath is remembered for the totemic thing of Europe, I think Gordon Brown is going to be remembered in a positive way for the totemic thing of dealing with the global economic crisis. And I think that really suited his expertise. Obviously, he'd been Chancellor for 10 years. He knew the economy, both domestic and global, like the back of his hand. And I think that would have been, it was already pretty bad for people. I don't deny that. But I think the global economic crisis would have been considerably worse in this country and globally were it not for the knowledge and expertise of Gordon Brown. And I think he deserves great credit for taking us through that. But I think a bit like Heath, beyond that one thing, there's very little of which to speak. I agree with you in terms of his time as Chancellor, but ultimately we are talking here about his term as Prime Minister. And beyond the global economic crisis, for which I think he deserves credit for seeing us through, I think there's very little to speak of. So I'd probably put him somewhere alongside Heath, I think.
Okay, so hung Parliament. I think actually you're quite right, Matthew. Yeah, looking at the list, I can't put him next to Macmillan and Wilson. Excellent Chancellor. Chancellor, but
excellent Chancellor, that's right.
Yeah. Right. Moving on, we have David Cameron. Now, obviously there's going to be a recency bias here. So the next lot might be ones where in re-evaluation we will probably have different sorting. So David Cameron, again, recency, but I just don't have a lot to say for Cameron. I just don't really know. I think his biggest goal was to kind of change the Conservative Party for being a more going back to its one nation roots and liberal and to be stopping.
Which ultimately he hasn't, has he? Yeah.
No, and I can't. I'm going to let you lead on this because I really need to sort of I don't have a lot of things to say for Cameron. I don't know if it's recency bias, but I don't have a lot of things to say about him.
I think there's two big things to say about him, and one is good and one is very much not good. So the good is that he led the first coalition government since the Second World War, and that was in of itself an achievement. And look, it was a stable government that people didn't think it would be, and it was. It was a stable government for 5 years. Did it do much that I very vocally oppose? Yes, it absolutely did. But it was also the government that brought in same-sex marriage, for which, as much as I don't think the Tories at large can take credit for that, because most MPs either abstained or voted against. I know that David Cameron was himself in favour, and that is to his great credit. And in fact, I was talking to the wonderful former Lib Dem minister, my favourite government minister of all time, Lynn Featherstone, at Lib Dem conference. I had a wonderful 10 or 15 minutes just sitting down and talking with her. I just love Lynn so much. She's fantastic. And she, in that conversation, she gave credit.
Even when I confuse my words on Twitter, which I won't explain, but it's an in-joke.
No, don't worry.
I was less embarrassed than she was. That was the irony. I was more embarrassed than she was.
But I mean, the ironic thing here, and I'm afraid this goes against David Cameron, is that whereas Lynn is fully prepared to and very willing to give credit to the fact that, David Cameron was Prime Minister at the time, and albeit that it was a Lib Dem thing, and it really was, I guess he could have blocked it had he wanted to. He didn't want to do that. He was in favour of same-sex marriage. He doesn't pay her the same favour. Whenever he talks about it at Tory gatherings, he never mentions the Lib Dems or Lynn Featherstone. And I think he should have more respect than that. I should point out that again, I met and interviewed David Cameron, albeit it was before his time as Prime Minister. I interviewed him when he was leader of the opposition. But then the other negative thing is, it has to be Brexit. Has to be Brexit. He held that referendum, and it was under him. Obviously, to the likes of me and you, Andy, who are very proud pro-Europeans. I mean, this was disastrous. Yeah. I mean, I remember feeling in mourning the day that result came out. And I think again he tried to, with his brief time as Foreign Secretary during Rishi Sunak later period. I think he tried to, a bit like Blair, he tried to rewrite some of what history is going to say about him. But I'm afraid history will say one thing about him, and that is Brexit.
I agree with you, Matthew. His legacy is just going to be Brexit, much like in much way as Heath's was. And for a positive, and for major, which just haunted him, it was Europe, and he just could not break that. He didn't detoxify the party. Well, maybe, no, that's not the right word. He didn't rebrand the party as he had hoped. Even things like the deficit and debt reduction, which, again, I think much like Thatcher, the scale of it was just off for me. Ended up biting him over Brexit. The consequences of Brexit means that we don't have we don't have our trading links with Europe, which means it's a sluggish economy, which means we can't grow. And I think the consequences of our growth, yes, partly planning laws as Labour are trying to deal with, but I think it's partly due to our locking ourselves out of our nearest trading partners. And I think until we go back to do that,
I think it was a historically awful thing to have happened. And it was happened because he was, and I'm going to put it like this: he was shit scared of Nigel Farage and UKIP at the time. He was beholden to the right wing of his parliamentary party, and he thought that he could breezily hold this referendum and win it because from his perspective, he'd won the AV referendum and the Scottish independence referendum, and he thought, oh, I'll be okay, I'll win referendums. Oh well, he got a ticking, so to speak, from people. I think I put him. He obviously his government came about as a result of a hung parliament, and I think I'd put him in. I think that's where I put him in this list.
Agree. For this is yours, and this is mine. Yep, awesome. Right, Theresa May. Again, she didn't probably not a lot to say. Recency bias, it's too soon. Again, another one who's just plagued by Europe. She just could not escape or find a settlement on Europe. She did do some good things regarding, I think, some social legislation when it came to protection for women and domestic violence. I think that I do think there is a decency in Theresa May. I think, unlike Cameron, I do think Theresa May has a decency towards her. And I think I have seen an interview, she does actually mention the Lib Dems and said, I think, because my friend Matthew Lloyd actually spoke to Lynn Feverson to do with a project that he was doing. And he said actually Theresa May was quite pivotal in that decision to get same-sex marriage on the table. But I think there's a decency for it. She was weak. She was a very weak leader, uncharismatic. I mean, she couldn't fend off Corbyn, for Christ's sake. Yeah, that's not good if you can't fend off Jeremy Corbyn and you deliberately call that election to you do it what Jim Callaghan wanted to do, or at least was being asked to do, and Gordon Brown as well. Probably better than Cameron in my opinion, but I don't know what you've got to say about Theresa May. I just think for me she'd go as hung parliament as well, just pretty unimaginative and couldn't get anything done.
I agree, and I think she's been a far better post Prime Minister than she was as Prime Minister, and you sometimes find that with people. Yeah, I mean, she famously in that 2017 election, which don't forget, she didn't have to call. She had the legacy of Cameron's, albeit quite small, but majority nonetheless in the Commons. And she ran that election on the phrase strong and stable, and she was neither. I mean, that was the great irony of that. And she very nearly lost to Jeremy Corbyn. I'm inclined to put it below David Cameron, to be honest.
Okay, so backbencher for you?
Yeah.
Bencher and powering through. I'm gonna put it in hung parliament. I think she has a bit more decency than
You're
David
very generous,
Cameron.
mate. You're very generous.
Yeah, I think she probably achieved a lot more. I mean, it's between them two. I think they're pretty much the same, but I think she had a bit more decency in her leadership. Just yeah. And no, I'm gonna. Let's be a bit excited. Let's keep this hung parliament, right? Boris, Bojo.
Yeah.
No, let's be kind, Boris. My dad argues he's worse than Liz Truss in his answer. He thinks he's actually worse than Liz Truss. Lied in Parliament, Partygate, levelling up that achieved nothing. all we can say, again, Europe, which dominates conservative leaders, all we can have is to say he got Brexit done, which, in my eyes, was an awful deal. I mean, I will say that, but I think it was just an awful deal. And rushed, satisfied, didn't satisfy our economic needs. I would say for me, Boris would be pretty close to backbencher.
Well, I don't disagree, and I mean I must admit that I do think that I would put this trust beneath him, but it's a toss up. I agree, but I think Boris Johnson. I mean I thought he was terrible, but he did win the 2019 election. He did gain a considerable majority, and I think that he did do that, whatever we may think about it. But I think his time as prime minister was horrendous, not only because of Brexit, and obviously from the point of view of anti-Europeans, that was a considerable achievement. But again, they can do their own list. This is our list, and for us, that was a terrible day for the UK.
Yeah.
He didn't deal with the pandemic well, as you say, Partygate and all of that, just appalling, just seeming to not care one toss about the people of this country, as long as him and his ministers were able to do what they wanted to do. So I agree, it's a toss-up, but I think, and we'll come on to this just in just a moment, but I think I'd put him ever so slightly above her, but not very much.
So backbencher, or do you want to put him in lost their deposit?
Well, I think he'd better go in the one just above where I'm going to put this just momentarily.
Okay. Yeah, I'll put him as backbencher as well. I was half tempted to put his lost their deposit. All right, Liz Truss, shortest reigning prime minister, and probably the most disastrous prime minister. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, she was just wholly unsuited for that job, and I think it says a lot about the Conservative Party that they thought that she was someone worth electing and putting into that position. I mean, I thought she'd only been in for 40 some odd days, but that's according to Wikipedia, it's 50 days. But even that, I mean, it's pathetic, isn't it? I mean, September 22 to October 22. And what gets me, and I know this is about her time after being prime minister, but she swans around now and turns up at Remembrance Day and all of that, as if she'd been some great prime minister. I mean, I'd be too embarrassed to ever show my face again. I think, in honest truth, I mean, her mini budget was disastrous and had real life effects on real people in terms of their mortgages, etc. I mean, she was just woeful. The worst prime minister, in my view, that we've ever had. And so I think she should sit by herself in the lowest.
I would agree, Matthew. Also, I don't know why that personality. I mean, I know we shouldn't be cruel, but pork markets, like, she was always going to be a meme just on that alone, even if she was successful in.
Absolutely.
Right. Now, this one might be too soon. It's Rishi Sunak. I mean, again, he's only just left office. So again, there might be recency bias here, and but I think for me, he'd be backbencher. I think as a person, I actually think there's something quite decent of Rishi Sunak. I think he tried to play this, this kind of hard, ruthless character, and I just don't think it was in him. I just think he got really bad advice on that. I think he should have been a lot more himself, because I do think, like Theresa May, there's a decency as a person. Don't like his politics. No. I thought he looked weak as a leader, and much like John Major, everything was completely dominated on infighting, and he just could not get a grip on things. But again, he was probably the only best hand they had on a very weak straw of members, which I think is lacking in all politics today from mainstream parties, a lack of big beast talents who could. But yeah, he'd be backbencher for me, I think. What about you, Matthew?
I absolutely agree, and I think that he should never have become prime minister. I mean, he was kind of middling ministerial level at best. And again, the fact that the Conservatives, I mean, wasn't better than Liz Truss, yes, but that is the lowest of low bars, right? I mean, that is literally the lowest of low bars. He achieved nothing of note. He was very cruel on things like trans rights. And I thought he was dreadful.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And for our audience, this is what the tally looks like. This is Matthew's tier list ranking of prime ministers, and this is my tier list ranking of prime ministers. Not too far apart, actually. I think we're pretty close. I think there was a few differences here and there, but yeah, thank you so much, Matthew, for doing this. It was fun. It was very interesting. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And yeah, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time, Mathew, whatever that may be. And until next time, don't forget to like and subscribe and to hit the bell for notifications. But until then, see you later and goodbye.